Broadcasting from London, Ontario, Canada. Welcome, I'm Kevin Bolmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, where we are celebrating and sharing the significance of our true selves and stories. An incredible story for you today. Adam Malamis is joining us. Since 2006, Adam's been helping companies solve complex organizational challenges, facilitating the achievement of nonprofit and community mandates, and establishing a firm presence in the markets for startups. That's a little bit about what he does. We're going to dive into a little bit more about who he is and the experiences that have precipitated that, and the conversation that I think is necessary to explore because of that. Adam's a man of many interests, including travel, skiing, scuba diving, and boxing. And that last one, boxing, plays into a fundraising and awareness initiative here in London, Ontario, Canada, that will no doubt come out in this conversation. Adam's also got a passion for working with people and seeking to understand, a much more complex thing than it may sound just by sharing that in a sentence that way. He's really interested in the usability of things, how they work, how they might be able to work better. And he's really drawn to what I'll refer to as conflict photography, something that recently took him into the streets of Hong Kong. And what an adventure and what a cause for discussion there. That's something that we'll be discussing in just a couple of moments with Adam Malamis, our guest on today's episode number 92 of Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Just before we say hello to Adam, I want to make sure to let you know that my online mindset and marketing mastermind community is now open to new members. It is designed to help forward-thinking small business owners stand out, connect, and grow in the manner that they desire and deserve. There is all kinds of great stuff in this online private community, including live and on-demand video training sessions, helping business people with effective marketing messaging and brand strategy. We do weekly VIP coaching, the opportunity to interact live with me. All training sessions and recording sessions are made permanently available for active members. And you'll have access to that anytime, 24/7, 365. You'll have unlimited access to our complete library, completely mobile, completely convenient, and be part of an amazing community from people all around the world. You can find out more about that at noscheduleman.com/mastermind. Memberships are available now. And as you'll see on that page, there are thousands of dollars of valuable bonuses with membership that are available there now as well. noscheduleman.com/mastermind. There are some really great people who have come together to help make this podcast possible. One of them is Gord Fancher at Connect One Consulting. You can connect with him at connectoneconsulting.com and bring him into your business or organization to help you learn how to expand your professional network and grow your business. Gord Fancher at connectoneconsulting.com. Thanks also to Laura Ma at Diamond and Gold Treasures, some of the finest jewelry in the area here in southwestern Ontario, and also offering jewelry repair, custom design, and layaway. You can reach Laura and find out more about her at diamondsgold.com. Diamonds with a Z, as you can see in between diamond and gold up there on the screen. Also want to say thank you to Susan Aluk of Travel Agents in Action, one of the supporters of Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Susan is a fully TICO certified travel agent. She's a destination, weddings, and romantic travel specialist. She also is a certified travel specialist in special needs and an autism travel professional. You can find out more about working with Susan at foreverpreciousmemories.ca. By the way, all of these people and the businesses that I'm mentioning, if you are watching the live Facebook stream or seeing the post afterwards, you can see the links to their Facebook pages right from the post in the description. And I encourage you to follow those links, to follow those pages. Terrific businesses in the southwestern Ontario and the London, Ontario area, like Brett Lucier at Provincial Glass and Mirror. Provincial is a professional full-service glass company owned and operated in southwestern Ontario, and you can connect with them at provincialglass.com. Brett was with me actually in episode 87 of this podcast and told his story of going all the way from the entry rung, the bottom rung on the ladder, all the way to owning the company at Provincial Glass and Mirror. It's quite a story. It's episode 87 of the podcast. Thanks also to Carol at Trickett Financial. Just posted a video with Carol yesterday on my Facebook page at facebook.com/noscheduleman, where Carol was talking about a mentorship program that she has put together for aspiring entrepreneurs in post-secondary school. She's done that in partnership with awesomepreneurs here in London, Ontario, Canada. Carol is a real gem, offering insurance and investments for Canadians and newcomers to Canada. And I encourage you to reach out to her at tricketfinancial.com. And then there's the monthly event series hosted by yours truly, Mo Mondays London. You can find out more at momondays.com/London. Think TEDx meets the Tonight Show, and you'll be in the ballpark. A little bit of the Muppet Show maybe tossed in. If you like this, Journeys with the No Schedule Man, and the exploration of stories and real people and being inspired by that and sharing different experiences, then you will love Mo Mondays London. momondays.com/London is where to learn more about that. I mentioned just a few moments ago a little bit about today's guest. I really appreciate people that I can't quite describe with one line or specialty statement. And in the world that I occupy in coaching and speaking and sales and marketing, I hear a lot of that. What's your niche? What's your lane? What's your one thing where you go an inch wide and a mile deep? What's your specialty statement? How do you position yourself as an expert? And that's fine if that's your thing. For me, I'm really interested in well-rounded people with multiple interests and who are passionate about what they do. So I was immediately attracted to the opportunity to talk to this guy, Adam Malamis. Adam, I'm not going to ask you what your specialty statement is, but I am going to thank you for your time and welcome you to the podcast. How's your world spinning today?
It's spinning well. Thanks, Kevin.
Good. I'm curious, what's the story, Adam, about when you first remember being curious about what I'll call conflict? When did that start to enter your awareness? What's the story behind that?
Well, I've always loved travel, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel fairly extensively. So back in 2010, my partner at the time and I were in Tunisia for my 30th birthday, and it was a good trip, uneventful. And I had come back, and sometime in January, my brother had texted me and said, "Hey, aren't you glad you're not there now?" So we went back and forth, and I checked the news, and of course something was going on. It was the start of Arab Spring, and my first thought was, no, I really wish I was there, and I wish I was taking pictures and seeing what it's like on the ground.
I had my microphone turned off on you. I didn't mean to just leave you hanging there. The love of travel. Mm-hmm. Let's go back further into the timeline. Where do you think that came from?
Oh, wow. Well, my parents are both immigrants. And so I can remember even back when I was single digits, they would take us back to Greece for a couple months during the summer. And it was always just so different. I mean, the smells, the flavors of the food, everything. And as I started to grow and age, I guess, I started working. I'd finished school, at least my first run at post-secondary. And I decided driving across the 401 from Pickering to Mississauga every day, sometimes commuting for upwards of 3 hours, just wasn't for me anymore. So I quit my job at 20 years old and took off to Europe for 6 months and backpacked. And so for me, it was kind of incredible, right? I never had that kind of autonomy. So that was probably where my love of travel and my love of traveling by myself was born.
You're giving me a lot of material to follow up and ask about here. The idea of take this job and shove it, and I'm going to backpack across Europe is something that I think a lot of people like me in their mid 40s wish they could go back and do. Although, of course, nothing stops you from taking on an adventure at whatever point of life that you're at. And then traveling alone. Maybe we'll come back to that. But let's fit the photography piece in here as well. When do you remember first realizing that you had an interest in photography?
Back to when I remember. I've always had a camera in my hand. I was fascinated by those little point and shoots back in the day when we used to have those little film ones that are like this. and you'd put them into the
Mhm.
camera. And I always used to take pictures. They weren't particularly good, but I liked it. It was kind of cool. You could get like a sense of stillness from it. But that was, I guess, as I started to grow a bit older and really appreciated stillness. Then it was just pointing and shooting at stuff that I wanted to remember. So I guess it goes back to single digits. As an adult, I would say that trip to Europe. I didn't know when I was going to be back, and I wanted to remember every detail.
I just wrote down something you said, appreciating stillness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I may have heard that phrase before, but that really jumped out at me of what you just said. Why do you appreciate stillness?
Oh, because my mind goes a mile a minute all the time. And so anything that gets me out of my head a little bit, that requires a significant amount of focus, that requires me to be present, I can appreciate it. Whether that's boxing, scuba, skiing, whatever, it just gets you out of your head for a little while.
I've always been fascinated by photographers,
Mm-hmm.
and the appreciation, and I don't even want to say capture, Adam, the sharing maybe in the communication of stillness, but that the idea that, and I don't mean to get too out there on you, but I sense you'll be able to go with me here and are probably laps ahead of me on this track, that while capturing and sharing a moment that appears to be still, the ones that are really good at it present it in a way that there is movement and energy to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that? Trying to capture, and that's not the word that I want, capture, but to notice and see something that you identify as something that you want to communicate and share in some way. How does your mind work when you're choosing what to shoot, and both in terms of, where you'll go to even look for the opportunity, and then what is actually going to make you click and try to find that moment to preserve?
If we're talking landscapes, it's a simple matter of just looking at a map now. I mean, when I was in my 20s, it was more like, oh, this is pretty, let's take a shot of it. Now, when I plan out landscape shots, I scout them on Google Maps, and then I check them out in 3D and say where the sun goes, and then I sit and I wait, which is also pretty meditative unto its own. When it comes to people, most of the time, much like what you're doing now, I just ask them questions because I'm just naturally curious. People are really interesting. So it's, and then I just wait to see what kind of expressions they are. When their eyes light up, you get that moment where they're just super excited, they're passionate about something. And then I take a shot then. When it comes to my time in Hong Kong, it was more like, oh man, that seems like that's going to be something. And then you chase. And you take a lot of really bad shots to begin with. I mean, for every one good photo, I must take 500 really awful ones. So I don't know if that ratio is normal for other photographers, but I got to tell you that it seems to be the ratio for me, about 500 to 1.
The cameras that you were describing a little bit earlier, I'm just smiling thinking about the advent of digital photography is helpful when the ratio is is as you describe, as opposed to, although there certainly was probably an art and a meditative quality to being in the dark room. Just a quick diversion. I was at a wedding with my sweetheart about a month ago, and they had somebody's manufacturing these Polaroid type cameras. It wasn't a Polaroid, but it acted the same way, where they wanted people to take the thing and then you waited until it spit it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you flap it, waiting for the thing and I thought, wow, I haven't seen one of those in, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. But back to the conversation at hand, I see photography as something where there is so much skill and aptitude that you can explore and acquire in terms of how to work the equipment and exposure and framing and all of that. There's a whole other quality, I think, one that I don't possess, but that I really admire in people that I observe that do have this quality of sensing something, not just a moment or an experience, but where to be and how to best try to document that. How much is that sort of kinetic quality part of the appeal for you?
That's a great question. And with regard to skill and aptitude, I mean, that's something that it's some days you feel like it's innate, and others that it's just constantly worked at. And I think any person who tries to create something, whether it's from an event or whether it's art, they tend to be fairly self-critical, and I'm no exception on that. So whether skill or aptitude, I mean, I don't know how to answer that necessarily. But as far as having that ability, the ability to be kinetic and to see an event, I don't know that I've really fostered that yet. I feel like I still have so much to learn. Sometimes I get out there, something looks cool, or something looks like there's going to be interest, or there's a moment where you feel something like almost like a compulsion, and you just go with it. And if it turns out great, it turns out great. And sometimes your vision doesn't equal your technical skill. In my case, that's often. But you kind of work through it, and you learn from the experiences. You just shoot more.
Movement seems to be this, and maybe I'm exploring something further to where my mind goes, where others, possibly up to and including your own, simply don't or don't see a point in. But as it relates to photography, and we'll of course get to how that relates to the Hong Kong experience and some other things to side as the discussion goes along. I'm really fascinated, Adam, in that idea of the capture of, again, that appreciating stillness and a moment that's sort of captured in time, that in that expression of it is still. When, as I speak with you and I listen to what you're saying and learn more about you, movement, contrast, and conflict seem to be real drivers of your experience. Even the things that you enjoy with scuba diving, you're in an environment that you probably as a human being don't necessarily belong in. There is contrast there. In boxing, movement is you better move or you're going to get clobbered. There's contrast and conflict in there. Travel where you can be you, but move yourself into another part of the globe, and all of a sudden the contrast in experiences and familiarity. And it seems like you seek those things to fuel your creativity and your sense of aliveness. Does that resonate at all, that description?
Sure. I mean, when I'm here at home, I don't really do anything that's that exciting. I mean, I hang out with my friends. I see my family. Most of my mornings in the spring and summer are spent sipping a coffee in my garden, and I really like a quiet life. And then you get me out traveling, and it's the complete opposite, and it's like feels like a totally different world. So that contrast, yeah, I would say that resonates quite a bit with me. It keeps things interesting, and it keeps me learning, and it keeps me on my toes.
Take me back to that backpacking across Europe. You'd been commuting.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't like what you were doing. Mm-hmm. You quit the job. You put the backpack on. What was the first place that you that you landed in?
London, England. And
you were by yourself?
Oh yeah.
What was your reaction to that? What happened?
I hope the hostel has a bed for me.
Well, so what age would you have been here?
20.
Okay, so you're still a pup, and now you're in a whole nother area of the world, and you're by yourself.
100%. Yeah, I flew out a month after 9/11.
Oh well, great timing. Yeah. It's a perfect time to travel alone.
It was super safe, actually, too.
You were probably safer then than on the airplane anyway than you might have ever been. But I'm curious about how that and the steps after, what that felt like, how these worlds opened up to you, and you were just discovering things and figuring out things like, gosh, where is the hostel? I hope they have a room for me, and there's no one around to ask, but the guy in the mirror, what was it like?
Well, I was nervous, and I was a fairly young 20, almost 21. I mean, really young. I was fairly immature, very sheltered. and I needed to feel like I was making my own way. So I got off the plane, got my gear, and took this massive, and I mean just massive, Lonely Planet guide. It was like 1,000 pages, a Lonely Planet guide to Europe, and started looking for places. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know where this is. So you'd start asking people where things are. And then most people on the subway or the tube were really friendly. And so they would just guide you to places. And it was as simple as just going up to people and being like, hey, I'm really lost. Where's this? And then you point in your book, and they're trying to find this map, because the Lonely Planet guides at the time had little maps in there. And so I didn't have Google Maps. I certainly didn't have a smartphone. And so it was just, you had to rely on people to kind of help you through. And I mean, that's carried through my whole life. I genuinely believe that people are helpful and good. And if I'm really thinking back, that trip solidified that mentality in my head.
What's your first experience with trying to navigate a new place where you didn't speak the language?
Probably Paris. My French is bad. I don't know how else to put it. It's terrible. And I would go say, well, le hostel. And you can see I'm butchering the language already. So to all the French speakers out there, sorry.
I've heard that, and this is an irresponsible generalization, or maybe it's not. I haven't been, but I've heard that the people in Paris are particularly forgiving of poor French. Wink, wink, nod, nod. That it's that could be
super friendly.
Were they?
Yeah, you hear the stereotype of rude Parisians, and you know, as long as you take your terrible French with some self-deprecating humor, I would laugh and be like, okay, so where am I going? And they'd answer me back in French, which is also contrary to a lot of people's experience. And then I learned very quickly how to say parler lentement, which is speak slowly. And sometimes people would walk you to the hostel. Sometimes they would just point out on your map and give you the opportunity to figure it out yourself. And the latter I appreciated quite a bit. But most of the time, if someone was willing to take a walk with me for a few minutes, at least you get to learn something about them, even if it's fairly brief.
I'll take that last question maybe one step further in, and the context that I'm thinking of asking this with is how you had mentioned that you're really just trying to figure it out by talking to people, by communicating to people. Where do I go and how do I get around? And which is a fabulous thing to explore all on its own. We're in this society that we've created for ourselves now where we've never been more connected but less available, and there you are sharing a great example of both. In any event, that's a different discussion. But what about, because I'm thinking of England and France as societies comparable anyway into the way that Canadian and to some extent American societies, cities look and feel. I appreciate that it's much older and there's much more history over into that area of the world. But what about not just where you don't speak the language, but where you're in very obviously a completely different functioning culture in terms of the economy, the architecture, the culture, and to what extent did your same rules of or guidelines of navigation apply versus really having to come up with a different kind of a technique? Where do you first remember thinking, okay, I got to navigate this maybe a little bit differently?
South Korea, Mongolia. Mongolia was super interesting too, because it's so vastly different. And where I've noticed in Asia, personal space is not as important as it is here. So I'll give you an example. If you're taking Mongolian public transit, or if you're in a crowded area and you happen to bump into someone or step on their foot especially, which is really insulting, you have to grab their hand and say sorry in Mongolian, which is an incredibly difficult language, or at least I found it so. But could you imagine if you bump into someone and I went to hold your hand and look you in the eye and say sorry here, people would be like, what are you doing? And as far as the language barrier, it was nearly impossible for me to learn any of the tonal languages. Like usually if you're traveling in Europe, you can learn the basics, like where's the bathroom, hi, hello, please, thank you. But Cantonese, Vietnamese, Mongolian, super difficult languages. And even learning to say thank you in Vietnamese, every time I said it, it would take a second to process because the tones and the phonemes, I just didn't have them. And it was particularly challenging where in places like Vietnam, charades gets you a certain spot. You can talk a lot with your hands. But in Mongolia, like I'll give you an example. If I were to ask you, Kevin, if I was your guest, we didn't speak the same language, how would you encourage me to eat? Like what gesture would you use?
You mean in general, like if I wanted to get you to sit down at a table and
we're already at the table.
We're already at the table. I don't know. I might point to my mouth or make like a scooping motion or point at the food and point at your mouth or something like that.
We're using utensils like this, and that's kind of the norm. In Mongolia, it's how weird is that, right? Like,
will you do that one more time?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I had you on the half screen. I wanted to make sure that people watching the video got to enjoy that full screen in case they want to stream that up on the 64-inch LCD.
Somebody wants to make a meme of me doing that. That's great. I'll be internet famous.
So that's what they do in Mongolia when they want to invite you to eat.
Yeah, and it seems strange to us, but to me, it's fascinating, right? Like it's something so completely different where you're used to having some similar movements and some level of cultural overlap. But in Mongolia in particular, there wasn't very much. And it's something that I appreciated so much about that place, and I miss it dearly. It's just such a cool place, and the people are incredibly proud, incredibly friendly, and they're fascinated with you as a person, especially if you're really interested in them. They kind of reciprocate. And so I was fortunate. One of my good friends and his wife lived across Macau and Mongolia, so we got to travel a lot together. And I credit both of them for having those opportunities because I would never have thought to travel to Mongolia by myself. But with Zach living there, it was like, okay, I'm coming to visit. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Is it cool if I stay for 2 or 3 weeks? And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And there's someone there who is kind of taking you around, giving you kind of a crash course. And before I went anywhere, I always started to read about the place itself, the cultural norms, but it doesn't prepare you the same way as actually being there. Because you can only find so much about appropriate manners, because respect is really important to me, and being able to show a certain respect of a culture that you're in. To me, it's vital to having a good travel experience.
What's an example of a place that and maybe Mongolia is it, a place that you weren't really sure that you were going to enjoy going to for whatever reason, but then once you got there, you were really pleasantly struck by it?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, wow. That's really hard to say because I think you guys can probably tell, like there's a certain kind of excitement that's just natural to me. So whenever I have a trip planned, I get pretty jazzed about it. And so I can tell you honestly, I didn't think there was any place that I wouldn't enjoy. Mongolia it's like, I wonder what that's going to be like. And I was really excited and curious. But no, I honestly, Kevin, I can't think of a time where I was like, I don't know if I want to be doing this. It was more like, all right, let's get going.
Well, the case in point, some people observe a global conflict zone and think, thank goodness I'm not in the middle of that. Bless their hearts, and I wish them well, and I hope it sorts itself out, and all of those kinds of things. But you, on the other hand, look at something like that and go, I need to be there, or some version of that. What was the genesis of the decision to drop yourself into the middle of the conflict in Hong Kong?
Well, there were a couple of pieces to that. Back when I was in Tunisia, I had a question that I needed answered, and I was fortunate enough that I had met someone at a professional conference who happened to work in media, or happens to work in media, I should say. And I was in touch with him, asking him what was going on the ground, how to prepare. And so that was a bonus. So I could go in at least with some semblance of what to expect. And so as Ramey prepared me for that particular trip, I was wondering if I could be if I could use my skills, the ones that I've really intentionally tried to cultivate, to tell that kind of story, and not to make little of the situation, any situation, in fact. But I wanted to know if I could be the kind of person who is running toward the action when other people were running away. And I don't know why that was important to me, but it was. And I felt like this compulsion to get that question answered. And it stuck with me. I mean, from Tunisia, like it was almost 10 years till I had that opportunity. And it really was an opportunity. I don't know that I've had that question answered. To be frank, it was a lot safer in Hong Kong than the media makes it out to be, at least for a Westerner. And so for me, I also wonder, at some point in the future, I've really, since, at least as an adult in my professional career, I've kind of framed things out as someone who really wants to make a difference. What that difference is changes probably decade by decade. But I wanted to know whether or not something like this could be used for advocacy. Something like this could be used to leave this place better, as trite as that cliche saying is, to leave this place better than I found it. And I still don't have that answer, but I'm sure I'm going to find out.
What was the question that you needed answered? If you said it, I missed it.
Could I run toward the action when everyone else was?
That was it.
Away?
Okay, I didn't miss it. I wrote it down. That's why I missed it. So you're running into the action. For those who are unfamiliar, in your own words, I don't know who else's words you would use. Talk about something else that we say that's trite and empty. But from the perspective of somebody who's actually been there, boots on the ground, you've been in it. Mm-hmm. What is it exactly? When I say conflict in Hong Kong, what's going on there, or what was when you were there?
In what regard? Are we talking like the political situation, or the actual events that were happening?
The political situation is sort of the umbrella. If you can maybe just give kind of a quick synopsis of that, and then more directly into the situation that you went into, just assuming people don't know and they don't have the context, how would you summarize that?
Sure. Hong Kong's a British colony. In 2047, we got to fact check that date, but 2047, it's going to be handed back to the Chinese, and then there's a transition date or transition period in between. So, but of 50 years. So there was an extradition bill that was proposed by the government. It wasn't particularly well received by the people, and the Hong Kongese people are looking for autonomy. They want to be their own autonomous state, and they're fighting for the right to be able to vote and be democratic. I mean, that might be an oversimplification of a fairly complex situation, but if I had to put it in a single sentence, is that the Hong Kongese people are fighting for the right to have a democratic nation.
I appreciate that, and thank you for that. Now, if we can drill down into more the specifics in some of the photos that I've seen that you've shared, that drill it down right into the city streets. Okay. What was it specifically that you went looking for? How did you even know where to go once you got there? You're going to say asking people again, right? You already answered this question. You're going to use the same trick.
It's the same thing. It's you make yourself vulnerable. You ask questions. Yeah, you trust that most people are good and want something similar. That they're willing to help if you ask the right questions and show them the general decency and respect that you would show to anyone else. And it worked out pretty well. I'm also a firm believer that when you're going into something, and anything, in fact, that you search for collaborators. I mean, that's been a theme throughout my life. I feel like we can accomplish a lot as a team, especially if we're both invested in one another's success. So my first kind of run, Ramey had told me that I should be checking Twitter. He gave me a few people to follow. I found out there was an event, and it was a peaceful protest at the Cenotaph. And it had been a few days or maybe a week and a half since a young Hong Kongese girl had her eye shot out. And so I don't know if you had seen this photograph, but there is an elderly couple where they've got their eye covered. And so I was there, and the police had shown up. It was still fairly peaceful. And I had noticed this one gentleman, also a Westerner, and he seemed to just be really fluid and comfortable. And I was nervous. I mean, game face, but I was really nervous. And so I was watching now my partner in the Revolution of Our Times exhibition, Aaron, just kind of go, and I was following him around like a puppy dog, just like, okay, what's he looking at? What's he doing? I'm trying to learn from this guy. And after the event had happened, a couple of arrests were made. I said to Aaron, I'm like, I got to be honest with you, man. I've been following you around all night, and I have no idea what I'm doing here. This is my first time in this kind of zone. What do you suggest I do? And so there's two instances there. One, Ramey was able to give me some advice as to who to follow, how to figure out where events are happening. And then two, I put myself out there, because Aaron could have told me to fuck off and been like, who are you? Your competition. But he wasn't like that. He was like, okay, here, this is what I learned in my first time. Here's what I'm doing now. And we sat and chatted for almost 3 hours, like well into the night. And he didn't have to do that. He was just really, really kind with his time, and took a moment to make sure that I was okay. So that's also another theme, that most people are really willing to go out of their way to make sure that that you're okay. I at least that's what I've noticed when traveling abroad, and I know that I always try to use that kind of level of care when I'm traveling as well.
You mentioned to me when we talked previously about really, and I'm paraphrasing here clearly, but being struck by here's this word contrast again, but the grittiness of what was going on and what was being experienced, contrasted against a really kind and loving and advanced people and a beautiful city. What were some of the things that you saw and experienced that really struck you and have since stayed with you?
So there were times, I remember on August 31st, it was the first time that I actually got to test out the Riot Gear that I had purchased, because there was a pretty significant clash on the island. Protesters had taken a stand in Causeway Bay. And so protesters are on one side of the street, police on the other, and neither are moving. The protesters still hadn't built the catapults that they were using to throw bricks, but they were using Molotovs at the time. And sometimes you get caught up in the heat of the moment, and you're not necessarily as aware of your surroundings as you could be. I found that even very small things, like where as I was running with the riot police, either the police would be like, hey, you need to get back, here's what's going on, or even the protesters, who have their own worries, of course, would be offering press and journalists bottles of water. And it's like, no, you need that, especially if you're going to get tear gas, because they didn't have the same level of gear that I did. So even little things like that, where they're asking me, it's like, hey, is this your first time in tear gas? Are you okay? Do you need like an eye wash? And I'm in full face mask gear with a proper Riot Gear canister. I'm good. But they were so concerned, because it had been, I guess, 10 weeks, 9 weeks of protests by that point, and they were used to it, and I was new. So little things like that, or people, as I was walking home to the hotel or to the transit, where I have my press vest still on, people would be like, hey, thank you. And I'm like, what are you thanking me for? I don't understand. And then we would get to conversation. They're like, you know what, the international community really needs to know what's going on here. So I've just found the Hong Kongese people to be really kind and considerate and incredibly thoughtful. And you don't really get that picture in the media.
There's a lot that you shared there that somebody like me, a very too much starch in his shirt, stay at home so far, Ontario, Canada guy, where you just very casually talk about the Riot Gear that you had purchased. I could have stopped you there and we're going to loop back. And that there are bricks and Molotovs and tear gas.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do the Riot Gear first.
Okay.
Because, this isn't your job. Mm-hmm. This wasn't a vacation, clearly. This is something that you felt drawn to go and experience and to try to document, capture, share for the reasons that you stated earlier of trying to make a difference and trying to communicate, and through the lens of the camera and the ability to communicate in ways like this, I'm guessing. And so you had to set aside time from your business and your work and your life. You had to be intentional about making arrangements to go over to this part of the world. You had to pay for it. And part of those preparations, I'm thinking about, making sure I've got my moisturizer and my shaving cream and an extra pair of underwear. Mm-hmm. You're going somewhere where you're purchasing Riot Gear. Where do you even go to buy something? Right? You only need the moisturizer, I think, for lighting your skin up after the tear gas, I'm guessing. But like, where do you even go to purchase Riot Gear? And what is Riot Gear other than a mask? Like, did you need a shield? Do you have like a Black Widow kind of and I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm trying to get across to people that are watching just two guys casually chat about this. The enormity and the reality of the situation that you were walking into. When you say Riot Gear, what specifically do you mean? What did you have to have?
So I looked into a variety of different things. First being the velocity in which rubber bullets and beanbags come out of less than lethal guns. I started looking up the specs for tear gas and pepper spray. And then I started looking into the types of supplies that would protect against it. So there was a lot of Googling, and I found suppliers that offered that kind of protection. I priced them out. I even got to a point of where I was like, okay, so if I use this piece of gear versus this piece of gear, what are the trade-offs? But I didn't have any gear, like tactical gear, in the sense that I had like plate vests or anything like that. At the time, it wasn't necessary, but I wanted to make sure I was covered for tear gas. Once when I was living in Greece, I wandered into like Syntagma Square, and it was minutes after tear gas had been fired off. And again, like I said, I was a really sheltered kid. I had no idea what was going on. And I remembered feeling really choked up. And that feeling sticks with you. So I wanted to make sure that if I was there in the middle of a fog of tear gas, that I was able to breathe, I was able to take pictures, and that I was able to kind of stay true to why I was there. So do a lot of research. You look at a lot of spec sheets, and you start to figure out what gear is going to work, and then you talk to people on the ground. So I'd asked Raymond, like, what's your gear? Can you take a picture of all your gear, the model numbers? So he did, which helped a little bit, but I wasn't going to spend foreign correspondent money on that kind of gear. It was exceptionally expensive, and clearly geared toward the military and toward journalists that were in actual war zones, not just conflict zones. So I looked into alternatives. And the alternatives were good for what I needed. So I had solid face protection in case any projectiles were coming as long as it's not a direct hit from like 10 meters away or 5 meters away, I would be safe. And I didn't know how close I would be getting, which was a lot closer than 10 meters or 5 meters, frankly. And then you've got to look into what kind of gear you're going to need for tear gas and for pepper spray, which is CN and CS respectively. So you start looking at spec sheets, and then you buy the stuff, and you're not really sure it's going to work. There's always that level of doubt where you're like, okay, what's my plan B in case I start choking and dealing with it? But then you also look at any of the media footage that's coming out, and they have medical teams on the ground, volunteer medical teams for press, for protesters. And so I knew one way or the other I would likely be okay, and I was willing to take a chance.
This might be a silly question, but did you purchase that before you went or after you arrived? Well, I'm just thinking about, I suppose you would put it in your checked baggage, but it's not the kind of, it's not, a bottle of suntan lotion and a pair of flip-flops. Where are you going, sir? What do you have planned? I guess if it's checked, you don't, you probably don't have to have that conversation, but wow, it's difficult for me to imagine, Adam. It really is. And I wonder, from what I've seen of Hong Kong, including in some of your photos, it looks like a beautiful place. It really does. And and I rather than put you on this spot, I'll tell you where my mind goes. Seeing someone like you get into the middle of that kind of a conflict and explore it and capture it, I look at what's going on with our neighbors to the south, the restlessness that I see from people even here in Canada over certain issues. And it makes me wonder, what would something like that look and feel like if it were to happen on the city streets here in North America? I mean, does your mind go there at all when you're in the middle of something like you were in Hong Kong, to go to something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very fortunate that we don't have to fight for democracy. But there have been protests, and some pretty significant protests. You can look at Chile as an example, the Catalan region. You can even look back to Toronto when the G20 summit happened, and there were significant amount of protests. There were some issues and some challenges with the local police. I think that something like what's happening around the world now with these protests can happen anywhere. And if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, you can see there were some really significant protests that are happening, even protests for the pipelines, how the police acted then. And it's not to vilify the police, I'm not doing that, but you had asked, like, do I ever think about how this could happen here? Well, it does happen here. And it's not for the same reasons, but the concept of fighting for something that you believe in, and getting to a point of like where you're on the fringe, where you could possibly die, and you're fighting for something like that. Yeah, it's certainly possible here, and I don't think it's that many steps away.
How long were you in Hong Kong for?
10 days.
Again, I told you I wanted to approach this with beginner's mind, and I apologize to people who are watching and listening if this sounds like a simpleton's question, but when you're in an environment like what you just described, what do you're part of that protest, and then you walk a few blocks away from it and catch transit and go back to your hotel and then find another thing that, I mean, I realize people are still living and working and functioning in these urban centers, but I mean, it's like I said, it's not a vacation. I mean, how do you see the curiosity behind my question? How can you be so in such an extreme environment, and then, now you're back at the hotel, deciding whether or not you want to take something out of the mini bar? Like, what was it like?
Well, it was surprising because, again, when you look at the media, it kind of feels like the city is stopped. It wasn't. People are still working and living. And in fact, that's a general theme that I've noticed with the Hong Kong protests, is that there was one march where they had 2 million people out. And again, we should fact check here. I believe the population of Hong Kong is something like 7 or 8 million. So 20% of the population marched after they said that they weren't going to remove the extradition bill, or 25% of the population marched. Like, that's insane, right? But these are living and working people. In fact, many of the protesters are youth, and they feel disenfranchised. And you know what? I listened to a podcast that it was really interesting, and the best way I've heard it put is, when I'm 50, what are my children's lives going to look like under the rule of China? And that seems to be the overwhelming sentiment from the youth of Hong Kong right now. It's like, what is my life going to look like? I'm used to a certain level of freedom. I want my children to enjoy that level of freedom, and I don't think I'm going to have it. And so that's why the vast majority of protesters are either in their teens or early 20s. Some of them are as young as 12 years old. One of the protesters was 14. He got shot in the thigh. I mean, these are children. And so the adults, and especially the elderly, you'll see a lot of pictures where you see the elderly saying, you know what, hit us, don't hurt our children. And these are elderly people, like as old as 86, 87. Yeah. And you see these pictures, and it's, how can you not feel a certain emotion? Like I feel it now. You can just feel like the chills going through your body. They're fighting for something that they really believe in. And then on the other side of things, everyone's working. People are taking the metro home, and they've got to be at work in the morning. And when you see a metro entrance just destroyed, I mean, set on fire, and then by the time you're up and ready to go for breakfast, it's been repaired. Like it's like, is this surreal? Like, am I living in the Matrix? That's my first 3 or 4 days there was like that, where you see a really heavy protest, and by the morning it's clean. And you have no idea how that happened, because you don't think that would happen here. I couldn't see it happening in Toronto, but it was like this.
What's an example of a time, whether it was in Hong Kong or anywhere else, where you were legitimately frightened for yourself?
I've been pretty fortunate. I was frightened before I went to Hong Kong. I was like, I had my will and everything drawn up, made sure that it was all sorted out, made sure I had a contingency plan for work, and made sure all of that our clients were taken care of. Everything was really put in place so that in case something bad happened, and I mean, it was totally unnecessary. I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but I always want to make sure that the people in my life are taken care of. So I took care of that before I left. But when I was really, truly scared, I was 20 in Barcelona. I got surrounded by a gang who wanted to rob me. And one of the guys had thrown a kick at me. I had taken the kick and ran, just like booked it. I was pretty scared then. But since that point, no, not really that scared. Even when I was running with the riot police, and on that side of the protest, as far as where I was taking pictures, I never felt fear. And I don't know if that's just plain stupidity, but it was always like, I have an out. I have a way. I have a plan B, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be okay. So again, like I said, I don't know if that's stupidity, but I felt like I had planned really well, and that I was able to get out of a bad situation, whether it's talking my way out of it or literally being able to run.
How, if at all, has this affected your perspective on your day-to-day experience here at home in London, Ontario, Canada, living and working? You take all of this in. I imagine that's got to really shift your perspective so that you maybe see things through a different lens, or am I wrong? Do you just kind of get back into the routine that you described at the beginning of the podcast, where this is what I do sort of day to day until I haul myself out of it? How, if at all, has it affected your perspective of life at home?
It has. Little things like I've always, in my adult life, and I say my adult life, like while I've been in my 30s, like I said, I was very, very sheltered as a child, and likely until my late 20s, I would say. But since I started voting, I've always taken voting seriously. But this time, in the last election, it was different. And you get sometimes from your social group the feeling like, oh, you can vote any which way you want. It's all going to be the same. And there's just this visceral feeling where you're like, are you kidding me? I've just watched this 15-year-old kid who yelled something at the cops get the shit kicked out of him, and you're still saying to me that the way you vote doesn't matter? Like, you got to be kidding me. That's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. We are so lucky to have the ability to choose our leaders, and to at least some degree control our destiny, or at least have that illusion of control, where we take it for granted. And with the day that I got back, and I was picked up at the airport by my partner, and she was just so excited to see me. the most incredible feeling to go back and see my dog, to be able to sit in my garden. It felt different, and to think that I had friends and colleagues that were putting themselves on the line out there still back in Hong Kong, and people I was talking to, and I still talk to almost every day. Yeah, there's a lot of conflict inside of me when I think about how incredibly good I have it. Because, like it or not, I mean, this is a controversial statement, but it needs to be made. We don't really understand poverty the same way that people in other countries do. And we take a lot of things for granted here. And I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, along those lines, you're involved in something here in London, Ontario, to address what really is becoming a really serious challenge, poverty and homelessness. What can you tell me about the genesis of what has become known as Fight to End, and maybe more specifically, Fight to End Homelessness? How did you get involved with that?
So I had heard about an event in St. Catharines called Pearl Gloves. And through my volunteer work with the London Training Centre, the London Chamber of Commerce, and a variety of other more grassroots volunteer pieces that I've taken on, I understood that addiction and mental health, as well as housing, seem to be the most pervasive issues, not only in our community, but it seems to be in a lot of communities like London. And so Pearl Gloves raises a lot of money. I mean, last year they raised, I think, $145,000 for the charities that they support. And I said, you know what? We could do that, and we could do it well. So I knew that I couldn't do it by myself. And so I had looked for someone who I thought would be a really good fit. And Brett Lucier, who you had mentioned from Provincial Glass, had been a really interesting guy. We had worked, I mean, we had chatted at the Young Professional Policy Roundtable through the Chamber, and he and I don't always see eye to eye. In fact, sometimes we really don't, politically speaking, but he's always well thought out, he's respectful, and he always has a way of just being able to challenge and think. And it got me thinking, it's like, who would I really want to do this with? And I just had this feeling that he didn't half-ass anything. He was just one of those guys who would just, if he committed to something, he was all in. So I asked him for coffee, and before he had his first coffee of the day, I was like, so I'm thinking of running a charity boxing tournament to support a homeless shelter here in town. It should support capital infrastructure costs. What do you think? He's like, I'm in. So it was just that quick. I don't think he regrets it, but I won't speak for him. But he's been an incredible partner, and the event that we have planned is pretty exceptional. Oh, I can't hear you.
It's because I had the mic. I had the mic muted again because I had. I was typing. I'll show it again now. This Fight to End.ca, and I didn't want to hear you to hear me click it on the keyboard, so I thought that might be distracting. And anyway, Bolmer blew that. Not any more or less distracting than not being able to hear me. This event, at the time that we're recording this particular discussion, it's coming up in a couple of weeks, in the middle of November of 2019. But am I correct in that you're looking at this possibly becoming something that happens on an annual basis, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already solidified our partnership with Youth Opportunities Unlimited for next year. Surprise! And we will be doing another Fight to End Homelessness. The idea behind the Fight to End, though, is that it could be tackling any pervasive issue in our community. So whether that's the fight to end hunger, the fight to end addiction, the fight to end poverty, it's important that we as people of means, at least in my opinion, are able to support initiatives and those who are doing a lot of good. And I think we can all agree that Youth Opportunities Unlimited, especially with their Housing First Youth Shelter, they're doing a hell of a lot of good, and it's absolutely needed here in London. So any way that we can support those kinds of initiatives, we should.
Just to be clear, we're talking about people from the community getting into a boxing ring, like sort of Vegas style, right? And
Yes.
to raise money and awareness to fight homelessness, which has really become an epidemic here in this city, and the other issues that you had mentioned besides. But the way that I've seen this, there are all kinds of different angles to it that are really intriguing, the least of which being that you have people from the community that have stepped up and said, I'm going to train. I want to be a part of this. I want people to rally behind me and get behind this fight. What have you seen from people who are not boxers or martial artists, or in some cases the furthest thing from that, women, men, different ages, different shapes, different sizes? What have you seen from some of these people in the spirit of getting involved in this initiative?
Commitment. That's been the big one. Everyone who's been selected doesn't have professional boxing experience. Most of them haven't been in a ring, and most of them haven't been in like a fist fight before. So it's kind of incredible. You get them into a boxing camp, and for 14 weeks they've been training so hard, and then you see the progress. At least that's what's been incredibly satisfying for me. You watch them from like not having the ability to throw a jab to throwing 1-2s like they were born to do it. It's kind of incredible. So you're right, though. We have other business owners, community leaders who are coming together to fight full contact. Like, this is fully sanctioned by Boxing Ontario, and we will have a boxing record after these fights. So I'm hoping mine is 1-0, but you never know what happens in the ring, right?
November 13th, have I got that right?
November 13th at RBC Place, yeah.
Fight2end.ca. There it is on the screen for those who are watching the video to learn more. And what were you telling me before? You've got tables still available?
At the time that we're recording this, we're 75% sold out. So get your tables, get your seats.
Before we wrap up here, Adam, and thank you again. I really appreciate when I have the opportunity to speak to people who can help me see things and consider things differently out of my day-to-day, just by being who they are and being willing to share. You've done that. I've really got a lot to think about of what you've shared today. And on behalf of anyone who's watching and listening, I want to really sincerely thank you for that, for what you're doing, and for being the kind of person who runs into the fire as opposed to away from it. That's one thing, but being willing to share as openly as you have is also valuable and I think important. And I think another way that you're looking to mention or to possibly do this, you mentioned Aaron earlier, and really quickly in passing talked about the revolution of our times. But when you gave me a little bit of an overview of what the two of you are looking to put together, I was really intrigued by that. And I wonder if you could just take a couple moments and maybe share what that's about and what might be happening with that. What is Revolution of Our Times?
So I'll get to that in just momentarily. What I will say is that my 10 days of running into the fire is not even a sliver relative to what other real photojournalists do, and who go into war zones, who are there still in Hong Kong, who are across the world. People like Lindsay Addario, people like Tim Hetherington, who'd given up his life, who died doing what he loved. Those people are the ones who are really running into the fire. Like I said, I just had a question that needed to be answered. That being said, Aaron and I are putting together an international exhibition. Right now, we're looking to we're about to solidify the Vancouver location, and we're soliciting submissions from photojournalists across the world who have been at the Hong Kong protests. And we will be putting on at least 5 cities, it's looking like, to raise money for both the Hong Kong Society and also these photojournalists who are, this is their livelihood. So you can find more information out at revolutionofourtimes.hk. Again, that's revolutionofourtimes.hk. And you'll be seeing themes like police intervention, affect and disruption of daily life. and also what propaganda means in these kinds of conflicts as well.
I'm just going to put it up on the screen. This time I did not mute my mic in case I left you hanging again.
Thanks.
revolutionofourtimes.hk. Keep me up to date, please, Adam, on how that comes along and what adventures might await in the future. I'm going to be out of town on a couple of speaking engagements at the time that Fight to End happens. But as you know, and as you noted, I know and love Brett Lucier. He's been very supportive to me, but I've lived in this community my entire life, and anybody that does anything to roll up their sleeves and to try to help make it better and help people in it really has my attention and respect. This has been fun. I can see us going full Joe Rogan and talking for 3.5 hours here, but we'll maybe agree to have another chat at some other point down the road. But thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for sharing, Adam. Good luck with Fight to End and with all your travels, and we'll see you out there on the city streets. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Kevin. And I really appreciate that you took the time and prepared to chat with me, and that you're telling people's stories. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. That's Adam Malamis. Again, revolutionofourtimes.hk is where you can find out more about that photo exhibition that he's looking to put together. Fightstoend.ca is the website where you can learn more about the fundraising event that he and Brett Lucier and their team have put together here in London, Ontario, Canada. I wish them all the best with that. It's an enormous undertaking. It really is. And unfortunately, in one manner of speaking, an important and very necessary one, because we've got people in this community who are not in the best circumstance, and it's really awesome seeing people like Adam jump in and do their best to do something about that. As for Journeys with the No Schedule Man, this is the 92nd episode. We've been around a while. The last, I think, 8 of them have been like this one, which is both audio and video. The previous 83 are audio only, but they're all available for you. The entire archive of podcasts at noscheduleman.com. Just click the podcast page or just go right to noschedulemanpodcast.com. I can't even remember my own web address. You can find them also on all the services like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, if you prefer to call it that, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Stitcher. They're all on YouTube as well. And the most recent one on my Facebook page at facebook.com/noscheduleman. But where you can always find all of that and links to it is right here at noscheduleman.com. While you're there, if you want to sign up to get my free email newsletter, by all means do that. There are all kinds of blogs and videos and things of that nature. And you can also find out more about the No Schedule Man's Mindset and Marketing Mastermind community, which is now open, accepting new members. You can find it there as well at noscheduleman.com/mastermind. I want to thank Connect One Consulting, Diamond and Gold Treasures, Susan and Luke of Travel Agents in Action, Provincial Glass and Mirror, Trickett Financial, and Mo Mondays London for their support of Journeys with the No Schedule Man. And more than anything else, I want to thank you for joining Adam and myself as we continue to celebrate and share the significance of our true selves and stories. And I look forward to seeing you next time. On behalf of Adam Malamis, I'm Kevin Bolmer, and thanks so much for joining us.